So in this video, we're going to use our trig ratios to identify a missing angle. So we're really going to be using the same ratios, but we have to use the inverse operations, because before we knew the angle, we knew the value here on this angle. Now we're looking for that value of that angle, but we can still apply the ratio because we understand that one of the trig functions equals the ratio of two of the sides, whether it be the opposite over hypotenuse, adjacent over hypotenuse, or the opposite over adjacent. Whichever two sides we have will determine which trig function we're going to use, but in this case we have to use the inverse because we don't know the angle and we need to find the angle. So on your calculator, you'll notice that you have the inverse functions, but they're annotated with a -1 as an exponent to it, which just tells you that they're the inverse of that function, meaning that they're going to do the opposite operation of what the original function was. So the sine of some number, some angle number, would have given you the ratio of the opposite over hypotenuse. And the cosine of some angle would have given you the adjacent over hypotenuse. And the tan of that angle would have given you the opposite over adjacent. But now, since we don't have the angle, we have to use the inverse function of those trigonometric ratios in order to find out that value. So it's not very difficult. You just have to know which buttons to push on your calculator. So based on this angle, we have the opposite side and we also have the adjacent side. So we're going to use the tan, because tan is opposite divided by adjacent. So we'll use the inverse tan, of course, in order to find the angle, because we don't have that. So we're going to mark this angle as being the x. And if we had been doing this before, we would have said tan of x equals 13 divided by 37. But now that we have to find x, we have to take the inverse tan of 13 divided by 37, and that will give us x. So we're actually going to do tan inverse of 13 divided by 37, and that will produce our x value. Okay, so this particular problem requires that you use the inverse tan. And you'll notice that right over the tan button is blue letters that say tan -1. So in order to get to that function, we have to hit our second function. Your calculator may have an orange second function, and so the letters on here would be orange. But nonetheless, you're going to use your inverse tan. So you have to hit the second tan button, and notice it says tan -1, and now you can enter your ratio, which is 13 divided by 37. And so we have everything that we've identified in our problem. When we hit enter, we get our answer. So our answer to this one, 19.35, if we round it to the closest degree, we would have 19 degrees. So when we do the calculation on this, we get 19 is equal to x. And because we were looking for degrees, we have to make sure to indicate that it's 19 degrees because we looked for the angle here. On this example, we're also looking to find an angle. This time we've been given the opposite side and the hypotenuse. So since we have the opposite and the hypotenuse, we're going to use the sine function because SOHCAHTOA tells us that sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So we have our ratio, but remember we want to find the value of x. So in order to get the value of x, we have to take the inverse sine of 21 divided by 32, and that will give us the value of x. When we calculate that out, we get the sine the inverse sine of 21 over 32 equals 41 degrees. So x equals 41 degrees in this problem. Here's another example. Again, we're using our functions to find this angle. This time, according to this angle, we have the adjacent side as well as the hypotenuse. So the ratio that uses adjacent and hypotenuse is cosine. So we'll use the cosine of this angle, and again we'll identify it as being x. So we have the cosine of x equals the adjacent, which is 7, divided by the hypotenuse, which is 13. Of course, we're looking for the value of x, so we need the cosine, the inverse cosine of 7 divided by 13, and that will give us x. And when we put that in our calculator, we'll get the angle size associated with that particular angle. So in this case, when we do the calculations, x equals 57 degrees. Here's the last example on this video. Try it and then pause the video, and then when you resume the video, I'll have the answer done for you. So here's the answer. You recognize that we have the adjacent side and the hypotenuse, and so we use the cosine, because cosine is adjacent divided by hypotenuse. We have to use the inverse of the cosine because we don't have the angle. We're looking for the angle. And so when we substitute all of this information or put it into our calculator, we get x equals 24.6, or rounding, we'll get x equals 25 degrees.